Judge Marlene Williams adjusted her black robe in the elevator mirror, mentally preparing for another Monday morning in the Atlanta Municipal Court. The familiar scent of coffee wafted from her favorite ceramic mug, a gift from her daughter emblazoned with "World's Most Fair Judge." The digital display ticked upward. 3, 4, 5. Her courtroom was on the 7th floor. Her assistant, Sarah Chen, waited by the elevator doors with her usual stack of manila folders. "Good morning, Your Honor. I have today's docket ready for your review." Sarah fell into step beside her as they walked the polished hallway toward the judge's chambers. Mostly routine cases, a few misdemeanors, one property dispute, and a financial misappropriation case that might be interesting. Marlene nodded, settling into her high-backed leather chair. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across her mahogany desk. She sipped her coffee, its warmth a familiar comfort as she opened the first folder. 20 years on the bench had taught her to expect the unexpected, but nothing could have prepared her for the name that jumped out from page 3. Marcus Jenkins. Coffee splashed across the desk as her hand trembled, the ceramic mug clattering against wood. Sarah rushed forward with napkins, but Marlene barely noticed. Her mind had already traveled 25 years into the past, to a different time, a different life. "Your Honor, are you all right?" Sarah's concerned voice barely registered. "I'm fine," Marlene managed, dabbing at the spilled coffee mechanically. Just give me a moment, please." When the door clicked shut behind Sarah, Marlene leaned back in her chair, her heart racing. Marcus Jenkins. Could it really be him? Her fingers traced the name on the paper, and suddenly she was 16 again, sitting in the bleachers of South Atlanta High School, watching number 23 sink three-pointers with effortless grace. She pulled up the case file on her computer, and there it was. His date of birth, address history, everything matching the boy she'd known. The boy who'd taken her to prom in his mother's borrowed Buick, who'd helped her practice her valedictorian speech until 3 in the morning, who'd promised to write every day when she left for Yale, and he stayed behind on a basketball scholarship to Georgia State. The photo in his file showed a man she almost didn't recognize. The bright smile she remembered had been replaced by something more weathered, more guarded. His once smooth face now bore distinguished gray at the temples, laugh lines around his eyes telling stories of years she hadn't been part of. Financial misappropriation. The charges swam before her eyes. Accusations of redirecting funds from a youth program, substantial sums of money gone missing. It didn't make sense. Not Marcus. Not the boy who'd once returned a wallet full of cash he found in the school parking lot, who'd spent every summer teaching kids at the recreation center for free. Marlene stood, walking to the window. 7 stories below, Atlanta was waking up, traffic building on the streets, people hurrying along sidewalks with purpose. Somewhere out there was the life she might have had, the one where she'd turned down Yale, stayed in Georgia, married her high school sweetheart. But she'd chosen differently. They both had. The intercom buzzed. "Your Honor, court begins in 15 minutes. She squared her shoulders, smoothing her robe with practiced hands. The law was clear about what she should do. Cases involving personal connections were to be reassigned. One call to the administrative office, and Marcus Jenkins would become someone else's concern. But as she reached for the phone, her hand stopped midair. Something wasn't adding up. The Marcus she knew would never. The intercom buzzed again. "Judge Williams, the first defendants are being brought up." Marlene took a deep breath, straightening the papers on her desk. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be right there." She walked to her courtroom door, hand resting on the polished brass handle. In a few minutes, she would face a ghost from her past, and everything she believed about justice, objectivity, and the choices that define us would be put to the test. The courtroom hummed with its usual morning energy as Marlene took her seat at the bench. Her hands, hidden from view, gripped the edges of her chair just a little tighter than usual. She nodded to the bailiff, Jerry, who had served in her courtroom for the past decade and could read her moods like a weather vane. "All rise," Jerry's voice boomed through the chamber. The Honorable Judge Marlene Williams presiding. The first 3 cases moved swiftly: a traffic violation, a noise complaint, a minor property dispute. Marlene maintained her focus, but her consciousness seemed split in two, one half handling the proceedings while the other counted down to case number 4. State versus Marcus Jenkins. When the moment finally arrived, she heard the back doors open before she saw them. The subtle shift in the courtroom's atmosphere was palpable, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. Marlene kept her eyes on the papers before her, using every ounce of her professional training to appear composed. Case number 2025 CR 4873, State of Georgia versus Marcus Jenkins, the court clerk announced, her voice echoing in the suddenly quiet chamber. Marlene looked up. Time seemed to fold in on itself. Marcus stood at the defendant's table, wearing a charcoal gray suit that had seen better days but was impeccably pressed. His shoulders, once proudly square on the basketball court, carried a subtle slope now, as if bearing invisible weights. But his head was held high, dignity intact despite the circumstances. "Mr. Jenkins," she spoke, her voice steady despite the hammering in her chest, "you are charged with financial misappropriation of funds from the South Side Youth Basketball Initiative. Do you understand these charges?" Their eyes met for the first time in 25 years. In that fraction of a second, 1,000 memories crashed through her professional walls. The taste of shared milkshakes at the varsity drive-in, the sound of his laughter echoing across the school gymnasium, the way he tied her corsage with trembling fingers before prom. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied, his voice deeper than she remembered, but still carrying that slight hint of Carolina drawl from his childhood years in Charleston. The young public defender beside him, fresh-faced and barely out of law school by the look of him, shuffled through his papers. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty to all charges." Marlene noticed Marcus's hands, always so sure when handling a basketball, fidgeting slightly with his tie. Some habits hadn't changed. She remembered how he used to adjust his tie before every big game, a nervous tell that only she had known about. The prosecutor, Linda Martinez, approached the bench. "Your Honor, the state has evidence showing systematic diversion of funds over a 6-month period. We're prepared to present bank records, witness testimonies." Marlene held up her hand, a gesture familiar to everyone in her courtroom. Her mind raced through protocols, procedures, ethical guidelines. The right thing to do, the expected thing, would be to disclose her prior relationship and recuse herself immediately. But something in Marcus's stance, in the way he stood protectively near his young attorney, in the quiet dignity of his bearing, made her pause. This wasn't the posture of a guilty man. She'd seen enough of those in her years on the bench to know the difference. "Ms. Martinez, Mr. Edwards," she addressed both attorneys, her decision crystallizing. "Please approach the bench." As they stepped forward, Marlene noticed a small pin on Marcus's lapel, a miniature gold basketball. Her heart skipped a beat. It was the same pin she'd given him before the state championships their senior year. He'd kept it all these years. The weight of the law, of ethics, of 2 decades of judicial experience pressed down on her shoulders. But so did something else, a deeper responsibility to justice itself, to looking beyond the surface of things. She had to handle this perfectly, had to ensure that every decision, every ruling was beyond reproach. "Counselors," she began, her voice low enough that only the attorneys could hear, "there's something we need to discuss before we proceed." The lunch recess couldn't have come soon enough. Marlene sat in her chambers, her usual turkey sandwich untouched on her desk. She just disclosed her past connection to Marcus to both attorneys, leading to a flurry of hushed conferences and concerned looks. The prosecutor had immediately pushed for recusal, while Marcus's young defender, James Edwards, had remained surprisingly quiet, his eyes calculating. Sunlight streamed through her office windows, casting a warm glow on the row of family photos adorning her credenza. Her daughter's graduation picture, her parents' 50th anniversary, moments that marked the path she'd chosen. But now the past she left behind in Atlanta's South Side and walked right into her courtroom wearing a tired suit and carrying secrets she couldn't ignore. Her phone buzzed, a text from her daughter Lisa. "Mom, saw your name trending on local Twitter. Everything okay?" Marlene sighed. Of course, word had gotten out. In an age of smartphones and social media, courtroom drama rarely stayed contained. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Sarah with the afternoon schedule. Instead, Chief Judge Richardson entered, his face bearing the careful neutrality she'd learned to read over their 15 years as colleagues. "Marlene," he said, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk about the Jenkins case." "Thomas, I know what you're going to say." Marlene stood, smoothing her robe. "The ethical guidelines are clear, but there's something about this case that doesn't add up. It's not just about ethics." Richardson settled into one of her visitor chairs. "The media's already picking up the story. Judge reunites with high school sweetheart in dramatic court case. They're painting it like a Hallmark movie." Marlene felt her jaw tighten. "This isn't about rekindling old flames, Thomas. You know me better than that. Something's wrong with this case. The numbers don't match the accusations. Marcus, Mr. Jenkins, has run that youth program for 15 years without a single complaint." "All the more reason to step away," Richardson countered. "Your personal history is clouding your judgment." "Hand it over to Judge Martinez. Let her handle it with fresh eyes." Standing at her window, Marlene watched a group of pigeons scatter across the courthouse steps. The same steps where 25 years ago she told Marcus she was accepting Dale's offer. She remembered his face, proud and heartbroken all at once. "I always knew you were meant for bigger things," he'd said. "Did you know," she spoke quietly, still facing the window, "that program of his has sent 37 kids to college in the last decade. Full scholarships. Kids everyone else had written off." "Marlene, I've read every document in that case file, Thomas. 3 times. The prosecution's timeline doesn't match the bank records. The witness statements contradict each other. And nobody's asked why a man who's devoted his life to helping kids would suddenly start embezzling funds." She turned to face her colleague. "If I step away now, this goes to a quick plea deal. Marcus takes the blame to protect someone else. That's who he's always been. And those kids lose the only person who's ever truly fought for them." Richardson stood, adjusting his tie. "You have until tomorrow morning to make your decision. After that, the choice gets made for you." He paused at the door. "Whatever you decide, do it by the book. Every eye in Atlanta is going to be watching this one." After he left, Marlene sank into her chair, her mind racing through options. The framed oath of office on her wall seemed to mock her predicament. To administer justice without respect to persons, and do equal right to the poor and to the rich. Sir's voice crackled over the intercom. "Your Honor? Court resumes in 5 minutes." Marlene straightened her robe, made her decision. She would stay on the case, but every ruling, every procedure would be textbook perfect. She couldn't save Marcus, didn't even know if he needed saving, but she could ensure the truth came out, whatever it might be. Opening her chamber doors, she heard the familiar bustle of the courtroom preparing to resume. It was time to choose between the safe path and the right one. The evening spread its purple shadows across Marlene's chambers as she pored over the case files for the 4th time. Her law clerk, David Chen, sat across from her, his sleeves rolled up and tie loosened, surrounded by stacks of papers and his laptop's pale glow. "Look at this, Your Honor," David pointed to the screen, his voice carrying the excitement of discovery. "The timeline of withdrawals doesn't match the program's event schedule. Every major withdrawal coincides with tournament dates, travel expenses, or equipment purchases." Marlene leaned forward, adjusting her reading glasses. The numbers danced before her eyes, but slowly, a pattern emerged. "Show me the bank statements again." David pulled up another document. "Here's where it gets interesting. The prosecution claims Mr. Jenkins diverted funds for personal use, but his personal accounts show no unusual deposits. In fact," he paused, typing rapidly, "his mortgage has been late twice in the past year, and he sold his car 3 months ago." "What kind of car?" Marlene asked, remembering Marcus' old pride in his father's restored Chevrolet. "A 2019 Toyota Camry. Sold well below market value according to the registration records. The buyer was—" David's eyes widened. "Sarah Martins. Any relation to our star prosecution witness?" Marlene sat back, pieces clicking into place. Sarah Martinez, the former program student, now claiming she'd seen Marcus pocketing cash from tournament fees. The same Sarah whose college application fees Marcus had allegedly helped with. A knock at the door interrupted their thoughts. Sarah Chen entered with a fresh stack of papers. "Your Honor, you need to see this. Someone just dropped off recordings from last year's basketball tournament." The video footage played on David's laptop, showing Marcus surrounded by kids in blue jerseys. He was kneeling beside a girl in a wheelchair, helping her shoot baskets with a specially designed hoop. The timestamp matched one of the largest withdrawals in the case. "Pause it there," Marlene pointed. David checked the equipment receipts against that date. More papers shuffled. Found it. A specialized basketball hoop, $2,800, marked as miscellaneous equipment in the program's budget. Marlene felt her throat tighten. The prosecution had painted Marcus as a man stealing from children, but the evidence told a different story. He wasn't taking money out, he was putting everything he had in, including the proceeds from his car sale. "Your Honor," David spoke carefully, "there's something else. The program's main sponsor, Tech Future Industries, their CEO is Linda Martinez's husband. The implications hit hard. A corporate sponsor pulling strings, a convenient scandal to shut down a program that might have become inconvenient. But why? What threat could a youth basketball program pose to a tech company?" Sarah Chen cleared her throat. "The building. The program's gym sits on prime real estate. Tech Future announced plans for a new headquarters last month. They need that block." Marlene stood, walking to her window. Below, the city lights twinkled like fallen stars. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably still working, still trying to keep his program alive despite everything. She remembered him at 17, teaching kids at the recreation center, refusing payment because everybody needs a chance to play. "David, I need every document about that property deal." "Sarah, get me the full sponsor history of the program and find out everything you can about Tech Future's building plans." They both nodded, energized by the sense of unveiling truth. "One more thing," Marlene added. "The prosecution's key witness, Sarah Martinez. I want to know who paid for her college education after she left the program." As her team dispersed, Marlene touched the window's cool glass. The reflection showed her younger self for a moment. The girl who believed in justice with all her heart. That girl would have recused herself immediately. But 20 years on the bench had taught her that sometimes justice needed more than blind impartiality. Sometimes it needed someone willing to look deeper, to see the stories behind the numbers. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more challenges. But for now, she had work to do. The truth was emerging, one document at a time. The courtroom buzzed with unusual energy that morning. News of the case had spread, filling the gallery with spectators, reporters, and former students from the basketball program. Marlene noticed several young men in suits who must have been Marcus's former players, their proud postures and concerned glances toward their mentor, telling silent stories of impact and gratitude. "The prosecution calls Sarah Martinez to the stand," Linda Martinez announced, her voice sharp with confidence. Sarah Martinez walked to the witness stand, her designer heels clicking against the floor. She wore success like a shield, perfectly styled hair, expensive suit, the polished look of someone who'd climbed far from her South Side roots. As the prosecution led her through rehearsed testimony about seeing Marcus pocket cash from tournament fees, a subtle movement caught Marlene's eye. David Chen had slipped into the courtroom, placing a folder on James Edwards' desk, the young public defender's eyes widening as he quickly scanned its contents. "No further questions, Your Honor," Linda Martinez concluded, looking satisfied. James Edwards stood, adjusting his tie. His nervous habits reminded Marlene of Marcus at that age, but there was steel beneath the young lawyer's uncertainty. "Ms. Martinez, could you tell the court about your college education?" "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance." Linda Martinez interjected. "It goes to the witness's credibility and relationship to the program." Edwards replied, newfound confidence in his voice. "Overruled," Marlene stated. "The witness will answer." Sarah shifted in her seat. "I attended Georgia Tech on a full scholarship." And who helped you secure that scholarship? I earned it myself. Sarah's chin lifted slightly. Edwards approached with the document. This is your scholarship application from 2018. The recommendation letter is quite powerful. He began reading. Sarah Martinez represents everything our program stands for. Despite losing her mother at 12, despite working part-time to help her family, she never missed practice. She tutored younger players, organized fundraisers, and maintained a 4.0 GPA. I've never met anyone more deserving of an opportunity. Signed, Marcus Jenkins. Sarah's composed facade cracked slightly. Ms. Martinez, isn't it true that when your scholarship fell short by $3,000 for first semester fees, Mr. Jenkins sold his family's antique watch to cover the difference? The gallery murmured. Sarah's eyes glistened. That's not. I didn't know about the watch. And isn't it also true that your current employer, Tech Future Industries, promised to promote you to Director of Community Relations if you testified against Mr. Jenkins? Objection. Linda Martinez stood sharply. Your Honor, Edwards held up an email printout. I have documentation. Marlene studied the paper, her heart racing beneath her calm exterior. Objection overruled. Sarah Martinez looked at Marcus for the first time since entering the courtroom. Her carefully constructed testimony crumbled. He was more than a coach, she said quietly. When Mom died, he made sure I had rides to school, food to eat. He believed in me when nobody else did. She turned to Linda Martinez. I can't do this. Not to him. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Marcus sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on his former student with the same encouraging look he'd given countless kids learning to shoot their first basket. Your Honor, Sarah continued, her voice stronger now, I need to revise my testimony. The money Mr. Jenkins allegedly stole, it went to buying wheelchairs for disabled kids to play basketball, to fixing the gym's heating system so kids would have a warm place in winter, to emergency medical bills for players' families. He never took a single dollar for himself. Linda Martinez's face had turned pale. Her case was unraveling, and everyone knew it. And one more thing, Sarah stood, squaring her shoulders. Tech Future isn't just trying to shut down a basketball program. They're trying to erase a community. But some things are worth more than money. Mr. Jenkins taught me that. Marlene called for order as the gallery erupted in applause. Through the commotion, she saw Marcus wipe a tear from his eye, his dignity intact, his truth finally emerging. The game had indeed changed, but the final buzzer hadn't sounded yet. The afternoon session began with an unexpected visitor. A man in a crisp navy suit entered the courtroom carrying a leather briefcase and a determined expression. He approached James Edwards, whispered something, and handed him a thick manila envelope. Your Honor, Edwards stood, newfound confidence in his stance. The defense would like to call a surprise witness, Michael Richardson, former Chief Financial Officer of Tech Future Industries. Linda Martinez leaped to her feet. Objection. This witness wasn't on the defense's list. Your Honor, Edwards continued, Mr. Richardson came forward voluntarily this morning with crucial evidence. Given yesterday's revelations, we believe his testimony is vital to understanding the full scope of this case. Marlene studied the new witness carefully. Ms. Martinez approached the bench. As both attorneys stepped forward, Marlene kept her voice low. I'm inclined to allow this testimony. Does the prosecution need time to prepare? Linda Martinez's usually composed face showed signs of strain. Your Honor, this witness's credibility is questionable. He was terminated from Tech Future 3 months ago. Then you'll have ample opportunity to cross-examine, Marlene replied. Objection overruled. Michael Richardson took the stand, his posture rigid with nervous energy. After being sworn in, he pulled out a USB drive and several documents. Mr. Richardson, Edwards began, could you explain your role at Tech Future Industries? I served as CFO for 8 years, Richardson replied, his voice steady. I was responsible for all financial operations, including our community investment programs. And what prompted you to come forward today? Richardson straightened his tie. Yesterday, I saw the news about this case. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The truth is, there was never any missing money from the South Side Youth Basketball Initiative. In fact, Mr. Jenkins' program was one of our most efficiently run community partnerships. The courtroom stirred. Marcus sat forward slightly, his expression unchanged, but his eyes intent on the witness. "Could you explain what you mean?" Edwards prompted. 6 months ago, Tech Future's CEO, Robert Martinez, announced plans for a new headquarters. The location they wanted, the entire block where Mr. Jenkins' program operates. When the program refused to sell, things got creative with the accounting. Richardson opened his briefcase, producing more documents. These are the original transaction records. The supposed missing funds were actually legitimate expenses, but someone in our aid department altered the digital records to make routine purchases look suspicious. Linda Martinez's face had gone pale. Her husband's name hung in the air like a thundercloud. "Mr. Richardson," Edwards continued, "why were you terminated from Tech Future?" I questioned these irregularities, suggested we find a different location for the headquarters. The next week, I was let go for performance issues. He made air quotes with his fingers. They offered a generous severance package, contingent on my silence. "Which you're now breaking," Edwards noted. "Some things matter more than money." Richardson looked directly at Marcus. "Mr. Jenkins' program has helped thousands of kids over the years. I watched my own son, who struggles with cerebral palsy, play basketball for the first time because of his adaptive sports initiative. I couldn't let them destroy that." The evidence was clear. Bank records showing the original transactions, emails discussing the property acquisition strategy, even a memo about managing community obstacles. Each document added another crack to the prosecution's case. Linda Martinez attempted to discredit Richardson on cross-examination, but the damage was done. The truth had emerged like sunrise after a long night, gradual but undeniable. As the session concluded, Marlene noticed Sarah Chen slip her another note. Local news wants comment on Tech Future CEO Robert Martinez's sudden resignation announcement. Justice, Marlene reflected, often arrived through unexpected channels. She watched Marcus embrace his young attorney, saw the relief on Richardson's face, noticed Linda Martinez hurriedly leaving the courtroom while typing on her phone. Tomorrow would bring the final arguments, but today had revealed something powerful. Sometimes the biggest victories come from the smallest acts of courage, from people choosing truth over comfort, integrity over gain. The morning of the verdict arrived with unusual clarity, sunlight streaming through the courthouse's high windows like nature's spotlight. The gallery was packed beyond capacity, with a crowd gathering outside on the courthouse steps. Local news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like metal flowers. Inside her chambers, Marlene adjusted her robe, her movements deliberate and measured. The past week had transformed what seemed a simple financial case into something that touched the heart of the community. Sarah Chen knocked softly, entering with the morning's papers. "The jury's ready, Your Honor," she said, placing a copy of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on the desk. The headline read, "Tech Future CEO resigns amid scandal. South Side basketball program case concludes today." Marlene nodded, took a deep breath, and made her way to the courtroom. The familiar tap of her heels on marble floors seemed louder today, each step carrying the weight of anticipation. As she entered, the bailiff's voice rang out clear, "All rise." The Honorable Judge Marlene Williams presiding. The courtroom settled into silence. Marcus sat at the defense table, his posture straight but relaxed. The past week had restored something in him, not just his reputation, but a quiet vindication that showed in his eyes. Beside him, James Edwards had shed his nervous habits, sitting with the confidence of a seasoned defender. Linda Martinez's chair at the prosecution table sat empty. After yesterday's revelations, she had recused herself, citing personal conflict. A young assistant district attorney had taken her place, looking somewhat relieved at the turn of events. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Marlene asked, her voice steady. The jury forewoman stood, a middle-aged teacher who had watched the case unfold with increasing interest. "We have, Your Honor." The bailiff collected the verdict form, delivering it to Marlene. She reviewed it carefully, her expression neutral despite the flutter in her chest. Years of practice had taught her to mask her emotions, but today tested those skills. "Will the defendant please rise?" Marcus stood, James Edwards beside him. The gallery leaned forward collectively, a soft rustle of movement, and held breath. In the matter of State versus Marcus Jenkins, on the charge of financial misappropriation, the jury finds the defendant. Marlene paused, not for dramatic effect, but to fully appreciate the moment justice aligned with truth. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Former students hugged each other, some crying openly. Michael Richardson, sitting in the back, nodded with satisfaction. Sarah Martinez, who had stayed to witness the verdict, wiped tears from her eyes. "Order," Marlene called, but her voice carried no stern warning today. She waited for the celebration to settle naturally. "Mr. Jenkins," she addressed him formally, maintaining judicial distance despite their history. "You are free to go. The court thanks you for your patience and dignity throughout these proceedings." Marcus turned to hug his attorney, then faced the gallery. The young men and women he mentored over the years surged forward, surrounding him with joy and relief. Among them was a young girl in a wheelchair, beaming as she held up her basketball team jersey. As Marlene prepared to leave the bench, a final piece of paper arrived from Sarah Chen. It was a statement from Tech Future's board of directors, announcing not just the CEO's resignation, but a new initiative. A multi-million-dollar commitment to expand the South Side Youth Basketball Program, with Marcus Jenkins as its executive director. The story would make headlines, but not for its scandal. Instead, it would be remembered as a moment when justice prevailed, not just through law, but through the courage of individuals who stood up for truth. A former CFO risking his career, a star witness choosing conscience over promotion, a young public defender finding his voice, and a judge who looked beyond surface facts to find deeper truth. Marlene gathered her papers, watching Marcus shake hands with jurors and supporters. 25 years ago, she'd chosen Yale over love. Today, she'd chosen justice over convenience. Both choices, she realized, had led her exactly where she needed to be. 1 month after the verdict, Marlene parked her car outside the newly renovated Southside Community Center. The afternoon sun caught the fresh paint on the building's facade, where a new sign proudly displayed Jenkins Youth Sports and Education Center, where dreams take flight. She smiled at the addition of education to the center's name. It was so typically Marcus to expand the vision, to see beyond just basketball. As she stepped out of her car, the sounds of bouncing balls and children's laughter drifted from the open gym doors. Inside, the transformation was remarkable. Tech Future's board had made good on their promise and then some. The old court gleamed with fresh polish, new adaptive sports equipment lined the walls, and a state-of-the-art computer lab occupied what used to be storage space. But the real magic wasn't in the facilities, it was in the energy that filled the space. Marcus stood at center court, surrounded by a group of children. He was demonstrating a shooting technique to a young girl while her classmates watched intently. He traded his courtroom suit for basketball shorts and a polo shirt with the center's new logo, looking more at home than he ever had in the defendant's chair. "Your Honor," he called out warmly, spotting her. Or, should I say, guessed Coach Williams. The children turned, eyes widening with recognition. Many of their parents had attended the trial, and the story had become local legend. Marlene had agreed to speak at today's program launch, though public appearances weren't usually her style. "Just Marlene today," she replied, setting down her briefcase. "I'm off the bench until Monday." A small boy raised his hand. "Is it true you and Coach Marcus went to school together?" Before either could answer, Sarah Martinez walked in, carrying a stack of certificates. She'd left Tech Future to become the center's new educational programs director, a decision she said gave her back her soul. "All right, team," Sarah called out. "Get cleaned up for the ceremony. Parents will be here soon." As the kids rushed to the locker rooms, Marcus approached Marlene. They hadn't spoken privately since the trial, maintaining professional distance as the media attention slowly faded. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "It means a lot to the kids, to everyone." Marlene watched a father help his daughter adjust her wheelchair near the adaptive sports equipment. "You've built something remarkable here, Marcus. It's not just a sports program anymore." "It never was," he smiled. "Basketball was just the hook. These kids need someone to believe in them, to show them they can be more than their circumstances." He paused. Like someone once believed in a South Side kid who dreamed of playing college ball. The memory hung between them, not painful anymore, but warm with perspective. They'd both ended up exactly where they needed to be, their paths diverging only to converge again in service of something larger than themselves. The ceremony began as families filled the bleachers. Marlene took her place at the podium, looking out at faces filled with hope and possibility. Her prepared speech lay before her, but she set it aside. 25 years ago, she began, I sat in these very bleachers and watched a young man teach kids to believe in themselves. Today, I stand here not as a judge, but as a witness to what happens when we choose to lift each other up. As she spoke, she saw Marcus nodding slightly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. The story had come full circle, but it wasn't really an ending. In the faces of the children, in the pride of their parents, in the commitment of people like Sarah Martinez and Michael Richardson, who'd chosen integrity over ambition, she saw new stories beginning. The headlines had faded, but the truth remained. Justice wasn't just found in courtrooms. Sometimes it lived in community centers where second chances were given, where past and present merged to create better futures, and where love, not the romantic kind, but the deeper love of service to others, transformed lives in ways no verdict ever could.